Hi, my name is Nicola Jennings. I'm director of Kolnagi Foundation. Welcome to Kolnagi Foundation Lates, talks with interesting people about new art exhibitions, publications and events in the UK and around the world. Today we're going to be talking about French Impressions, prints from Manet to Cézanne, an exhibition currently on at the British Museum. Well, it should be on, but it's closed, of course, because of lockdown. The exhibition gives us a great introduction to the way that late 19th century artists were exploiting the creative possibilities of printmaking and making it possible for many middle-class people to begin to collect art. So a really interesting moment in art history. I'm delighted to welcome today Ronald Bornstein, a collector of paintings, drawings and prints. Some of his prints appear in the exhibition. So Ron, can you give us a very quick introduction to what the exhibition's about?
I would be happy to, Nicola. The British Museum has one of the three largest collections of prints and drawings in the world. Over 50,000 drawings and several million prints. It's not usually known for its works on paper collection, but if you go up to the fourth floor in the back, it's a wonderland that can open up to you and to anyone else who's interested in the subject. The works in this collection are particularly there because of a great keeper of prints and drawings of the British Museum by the name of Campbell Dodson, who spent about 40 years of his life there and was a great collector and supporter of French Impressionist prints. And when he died, he gave 5,000 prints of all sorts. The British Museum has many wonderful curators, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple in particular. One is Jenny Ramkalawan, who really did the heavy lifting on this work, and the work is a tribute to her and her interest in the subject matter, and also Hugo Chapman and his whole staff. Why is this particular exhibition important? Well, I think it's important for two reasons. One is it has some rare prints that I've never seen before, even though I've been looking at prints for many, many decades. And but it also has a wide sampling of prints of lesser-known artists. I mean, you'll probably be familiar with such artists as Degas, Gauguin, Toulouse-Lautrec, Vuillard, Bonnard, Renoir, Cézanne, Pissarro, all of whom appear in this exhibition. But it also has a wealth of information and images. There are about 80 images in the exhibition altogether, from lesser-known artists and artists who had fascinating lives. Works on paper, specifically prints, were the means of the general public seeing these works if they didn't have the good fortune to go to a museum or a gallery, which many of them could not. So I'd like to focus on several other artists, specifically two categories of artists. One, women artists. There are three women artists represented in the exhibition, and the other, being American, is American artists.
Great. Well, Ron, I think that gives us quite a good general introduction. Why don't we start, though, with this image that we have on screen at the moment, the cover of L'Estampe Moderne, which was a publication dedicated to printmaking.
They were published on a periodical basis, mainly in the 1890s and perhaps into the 20th century. But people would subscribe to them and they would collect prints, and there was usually some background information on each of the prints. They're quite lovely. The British Museum has a number of them, and including three that are in the exhibition. So you can see the work next to the portfolio. This is the portfolio cover, which is the same for each of the numbers, as they would call it.
Before we go on to the subjects that you mentioned, can we talk about one of the other prints that you contributed from your own collection? which is this wonderful print of the Eiffel Tower under construction by Henri Rivière.
This is from a volume that I lent the British Museum for the exhibition of 36 views of the Eiffel Tower, which were mainly drawn around the time that the Eiffel Tower was constructed in 1889 to commemorate the centenary of the French Revolution. The images were inspired by one of the great Japanese printmakers, Hokusai. His most famous print, of course, is the Great Wave, which is from the same series and probably the best known.
Mary Cassatt, moving on to one of the female artists I think that you're going to talk about, she was very influenced, wasn't she, by Japanese prints?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is one of the great color dry points with soft ground etching and aquatint, very, very complex process that Cassatt made in a series. And near this in the exhibition is a print by Utamaro, one of the few Japanese prints, just along with the Hokusai. She was also one of the American artists because she moved from Philadelphia to Paris and started studying art. She was a great friend of Edgar Degas, and there's a wonderful print by Degas, one of his greatest prints, of Mary Cassatt and her sister at the Louvre, which is also in the exhibition.
Shall we move on to the next female artist?
Yeah, Berthe Morisot is probably the best known woman impressionist. She was admired by Edouard Manet. She was also married to Manet's younger brother, so she was the sister-in-law of Manet, and there are a number of relationships like that in the exhibition.
So shall we move on to Suzanne Valadon, who's another of the female artists?
Absolutely. She was certainly the greatest female personality of the women artists. She was a muse. She was painted by, and a model. She was painted by Renoir. And she appears in some of his famous paintings. She lived in Montmartre. She was born out of wedlock. She had many jobs when she was younger.
She started modeling at 15, didn't she?
Yeah, but she was a waitress. She was a model. She was a trapeze artist for a while before she was injured. So very interesting. And she was also a well-known mistress. She lived with Toulouse-Lautrec for a little while. She was the love of the life of Erik Satie, the famous composer who really never got over her breaking up with him. And there are numerous other famous artists who are reputed to have been her lovers. And she's also known as a mother because she was the mother of Maurice Utrello, who was born and grew up in Montmartre, and another artist that may be familiar and is most well known, I suppose, for his scenes of Montmartre. So very interesting woman and very much appreciated by the art world. When she died in the 1930s, her funeral was attended by Picasso, who knew her from Paris of the Belle Époque.
So shall we move on to your second American artist?
Second American, yes, James Abbott Mcneil Whistler. Another fascinating character, certainly was well known, I should say notorious, in London during his time. But he had an interesting background. He grew up in Moscow, because his father was asked by the Tsar to design the railroad between Moscow and and St. Petersburg. And he had gone to West Point for his training, the United States Military Academy at West Point. So Whistler grew up in Moscow and learned French because that was the court language at the time. And then he decided to follow his father's footsteps into West Point, which was not a great success. He was number one in draftsmanship, but he was at the bottom of his class in decorum. He was so notorious in his behavior that he was asked to leave. So he became an artist doing coastal maps for the U.S. Coastal Survey and learned to be a very fine draftsman and printmaker. There's some absolutely fabulous prints here in the exhibition of his in Venice. He also lived in Paris for a while, and he did prints of Paris, and of course he's well represented in UK collections.
I believe he's known as one of the best printmakers ever. People speak about him alongside Rembrandt. His etching, the velvety quality of the inks is amazing.
Well, I can't disagree with you, Nicola, and I don't think many people would. But what you may not have noticed is the Japanese influence. He's pretty well known for his Japanisme. Some of the tonality here, as you were mentioning, looks very much like some of the tonality that you see in 19th century Japanese prints, but that are made from wood blocks, and they incorporate the grain of the wood blocks into the print. Very inventive, and a great influence on Western art, both in Europe and America.
Wonderful. Well, shall we move on to the last artist I think we're going to talk about, which is Paul Helleu.
Paul César Helleu was a very famous fin du siècle, turn of the century painter and printmaker who also made drawings of elegant women. And there are many beautiful Helleu portraits of women and children as well. But the one in the exhibition is unique in several respects. First of all, it doesn't show the face of the woman. It's his wife, Anne, from the derrière, leaning down and looking at Watteau drawings, red chalk drawings, at the Louvre. And I'm particularly fond of this for several reasons. One is the reversal of the woman, which is very, very different and inventive, and also the homage that it makes to French works on paper that preceded the Belle Époque. And this is a particularly lovely example because it has the red ink in it, which you do not see in all the prints. And the other thing that makes this such a special print is the inscription, although this was done in the, I think around the turn of the century, it was inscribed to Campbell Dodgson a number of years later when he was the keeper of prints and drawings at the British Museum. So there's a very personal aspect to this for the British Museum, and again, this is one of many prints in the exhibition that haven't been seen for 40 years, and it's a real treat to have this available to the public. But the greatest art work by Helleu, and probably the largest work of any artist in this collection or anywhere else in the world perhaps, is that, which is the ceiling of Grand Central Station, the main concourse, which is, passed by hundreds of thousands of people a day. I think that's a nice way to close and also show the American connection with the flag hanging down there.
Ron, thank you so much for talking to us. It's been wonderful. If you want to know more about the differences between lithographs, which were a new technique, and etchings, and dry point, which were older techniques, but which these artists used as well, I highly recommend that you go to one of these two websites. Obviously, there are lots of others. There's books. There's lots of places that you can find out more about them. I am really looking forward to going to the exhibition. I believe it's open until the 9th of August. Is that right? So hopefully we will get a chance to go back in when lockdown ends.
I don't know if it's going to be extended, but that would be my hope. So, but who knows these days? Who knows?